So welcome everyone to the September CCTS Forum. I'm Ken Sag, the director of the KL2 and TL1 program, and also the site PI for the study we'll be describing today, which we call STRIDE. We'll explain what that is as we go. But it's really a great opportunity for me today to bring to you a presentation that brings together three of the CTSAs. So this is a study supported by NCATS that is a three-site investigation. The lead is UMass with Stephanie Lemon and Jerome Allison as the PIs. We're also working collaboratively with Vanderbilt University, and they are on with us today as well, and then UAB. The study is focused on the topic of clinical trial recruitment, particularly with the focus on underrepresented populations. And what we'd like to do today is divide this up into three parts. Jerome Allison will start out and talk about some general issues around recruitment challenges, particularly as it relates to underrepresented minorities. Mona will follow. Mona Fouad is well known to all of us, the head of our Minority Health Center. I'll introduce her briefly at that time. And Mona is going to talk about things that we've been doing at UAB. And then I'll introduce the STRIDE study. So there's really two purposes today. One is to talk in general about the topic and get some discussion and feedback. And the second is to introduce you to the STRIDE study for two purposes. One is we want to get your feedback about where we are. And secondly, we'd like to solicit some of your interest in part of this study and hopefully identifying studies at UAB that could be included. So it's a true pleasure to introduce Dr. Jerome Allison, colleague, collaborator, good friend, former faculty here at UAB, now up at what we affectionately refer to as UAB North at UMass Worcester. Jerome has worked with us for many years, and he's going to talk about a topic that really constitutes the major challenge to doing clinical trials. It's been said that when you do clinical trials, there's three big challenges. They are recruitment, recruitment, and recruitment. And particularly as it relates to recruiting underrepresented populations, so that when we get done with the study, we actually have a representative sample and can talk about the results at a much broader level. So I'm going to let Jerome introduce his topic. I'm going to give each speaker 15 minutes, and then we want to make sure we have time at the end for feedback from the group. So Jerome, please take it away.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. And so it is so wonderful to be able to reconnect with everyone, especially at my longtime home institution of UAB. And I want to say that before I put this on full screen, I was enjoying the wonderful surroundings in the Center for Advanced Medical Studies there, and also vicariously participating in the refreshments that you guys are sharing, and sort of wishing that I was there. So it's really a professional and personal joy to work on this project with Ken and with Liz at UAB, and also with Stephanie Lemon and Karen Goins up here at UMass, and with Colleen and Paul Harris at Vanderbilt. And also it's a particular honor for me to be able to present alongside of Mona. And Mona, I have often sung your praises up here at UMass, and now my colleagues are going to really get to see you in action, so I'm excited about that. I also want to thank Isabel Pierre-Louis here at UMass, and also Joshua Melnick and Liz Ryan at UAB for working on these slides and finding a lot of this very interesting and fascinating material. The goal of the presentation will be to review selected aspects of clinical trial recruitment. It's really a very vast topic, and I know that there are many experts in the room and people in the room who've had a lot of experience, a lot more than me. But I wanted to just pick out a few selected facets that are very interesting and offer potential practical insight into improving overall participation and also diversity of participation. So that will be the goal of the presentation. This slide illustrates a pain that I think probably will resonate with many people there in the audience. I know it certainly resonates with me, that we all have trouble reaching our recruitment goals. But when you actually look in the national across national data, what's really happening, it's more staggering that you might think it would be just by your own personal experience or talking to someone. And certainly the time that it takes to recruit for clinical trials and lagging recruitment is one of the biggest important contributors to increased cost in clinical trials. With that said, this is a very interesting slide that I wish I could claim credit for. So Ken, who developed this? Did you come up with this, or was it Joshua that came up with this?
Hard to say. It's a joint piece.
Hard to say. It's a collective effort, but it really captures the essence of recruitment. On the one hand, we want to certainly only enroll those people that are from the patient population that we are targeting and that meet inclusion criteria. And individuals can be identified through different means. But in addition to that, there's a larger population of those who might be interested in clinical trials or might be interested in some type of research, but are not necessarily eligible. And finding that sweet spot, the intersection of those who are eligible and interested, really, I guess, constitutes what I call the art of a very effective recruitment program. This study is a very interesting study by Elizabeth Mahone and from the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, which is a public-private partnership. And it's the results of a survey of around 80 or so stakeholders in clinical trials. And this includes funding agencies, PIs that are doing this work, and also research coordinators. And the survey has many facets to it, which I can't go into now because of time constraints. But this slide here illustrates some of the findings from this work. And in it, respondents were asked to focus on or rate methods they've used to be successfully recruit in clinical trials. And you can see these are ordered. Their approaches to recruiting on the left-hand side that are ordered in descending order. Done this, found it useful, sort of, I guess, been there, got the t-shirt, and that's in the blue, and the orange part is done this, found it ineffective. And so you can see that obvious strategies include recruiting from medical records, using hospital discharge databases. I found it interesting that electronic alerts to physicians don't really seem to work very well, or really not a top strategy. I think that's probably related to the fact that we're all so busy in clinic that it's just very hard to integrate this into clinical flow. And the next item down deals with electronic alerts to clinical trial staff about eligible patients and appointments. And I can say that we're now as an aside, at our CTSA, starting to sort of explore the interface between data mining and using the electronic health record as a way to trigger a customized alert. So maybe that will be a more promising approach in the future. This article goes on to actually identify specific barriers and talk about addressing them. It emphasizes the importance of doing feasibility studies, because very often in your armchair you don't know what's going to work and what is going to work. And it also has some very interesting discussion on the importance of the patient perspective and patient advocates in gaining insight into recruitment strategy and navigation. I know Mona's going to talk about her very successful approaches using that type of methodology. So this is the topic at hand, which is really more fascinating to me than just simple difficulties in recruiting, and that is, how do we increase representation in clinical research? This slide actually, and then there's many other ways this could be documented and shown over and over again, that recruitment of populations of color into clinical trials lags far behind what is their prevalence in the U.S. population. And you know, as Stephanie and I were thinking about this topic, you could really make an argument that perhaps that recruitment should be greater than representation in the U.S. population if you want to have a large enough subgroup to be able to examine heterogeneity of clinical effect. So just reaching the standard of U.S. population representation may not even be adequate in and of itself. I've always enjoyed reading this article. It's a bit old now in PLOS Medicine by Wendler, but it is a systematic review of 20 oncology trials, I believe, that and includes over 70,000 individuals. And I sort of call this a myth-busting article, and I know it was quoted by Reagan Durant in some of his work that I'll mention. But this article makes the point that contrary to popular belief, minorities consent to research studies at the same rate as whites. And you can see here, these are various consent rates just sort of pulled from the article. There's a whole lot more depth in the article about this that suggests that when approached in the right way, that whites and African-American Hispanics are about equally willing to participate in various forms of research. And, you know, I'll just sort of take a detour here and say that, you know, up there it says contrary to popular belief. I have to say that that was my popular belief before I really delved into data. You hear about this stuff about underrepresentation, and the natural response is, well, it's all, quote, their fault. And this slide is beginning to put a brick in the wall that suggests that it's really not their fault, and maybe it's more of our fault. This slide is from a national probability poll that included around 1,800 people that equally divided roughly amongst whites, African-American, Latinos, and Asians. And once again, it's more recent data, but it actually confirms just about equal willingness to participate, a stated theoretical willingness to participate in clinical trials of around 70%. But I really want to point to the last two sets of columns, where the blue represents non-Hispanic whites and the orange represents Asian, African Americans, and Latinos. And you can see actually that there's a greater admiration of research participants recognized in the minority community, and also a greater importance of participating in clinical trials recognized in the minority community. And I think I would call this a reservoir of altruism. And, you know, when I was at UAB and working with patients at Cooper Green Hospital and patients from the area of Tuskegee University, you know, over and over again, I would personally hear about how it really matters to individuals in the African American community and other communities of color that they can contribute something to helping someone else improve their own health. And that is talked about a lot by this article in the American Journal of Public Health that really goes into the concept of altruism, the willingness to support clinical trials to improve the health of others, that's present to a highly advanced degree in minority populations. And then this slide is extracted from some work from Reagan Durant, who's now at UAB, and I just love it. So I'm up here in the Boston area presenting to you guys down in the South about African American recruitment from a sample that Reagan did, and this sample is actually drawn from up here in Boston when he was doing his fellowship up here, I believe. And even though these African Americans were up north, they were still very much aware of Tuskegee. But the main point that I took away from this article is that trust in physicians was really the same in this cohort of elderly Black and white individuals, that they had almost identical scores on the primary care assessment physician trust scale, primary care assessment physician trust scale. And I interpret this to mean that African Americans and probably other populations are very much capable of forming deep bonds with healthcare professionals and healthcare providers. And that's very important, I think, as we begin to consider strategies for increasing diversity in recruitment. So this is a slide that sort of makes me a bit ashamed, to tell you the truth. And I think that it's perhaps one of the most important remaining disparities that hasn't been addressed. And this is about a disparity of words, as Egley describes it in this article on Health Expectations, which is a review of a very large number of oncology visits. And these visits were videotaped and recorded. And as you can see from the first panel, is that physicians spent considerably less time talking to their black patients and to their white patients in general, and about the topic of clinical trials. And as I've talked with actually people up here at UMass and others that I know, they say, you know, this really sort of rings true. And, you know, it really brings me to question, have I ever done this in clinic? And so I'm glad to have this data brought to the light. But the other panel on the right-hand side also extends the concept for those who were asked about participation in clinical trials, in oncology clinical trials. You can see that even there was much less time spent talking about the risk, the alternatives, the various components of informed consent. And so maybe this might begin to give a clue, combined with the earlier data about low participation rates. This is a slide taken from the NIH bioethics course on achieving informed consent. And I like this because it involves an overlapping and cyclical process between discussion, revealing facts, listening, and where the two meet, you can really have an understanding about these issues related to clinical trial participation, altruism, informed consent. And so it builds on the idea that it's important to identify recruitment barriers and so that we can overcome them. And barriers can be classified as participant, investigator, and protocol barriers. And, you know, I guess one of the main messages to take away from this presentation is that the participant barriers aren't like, oh, populations of color aren't interested, they don't care about clinical trials, they don't care about helping others. That's not a barrier. The participant barriers are more like transportation or things along those lines, difficulty achieving, getting childcare to come to clinical trial meeting exams. But we really want to focus more on investigator barriers and protocol barriers, as you'll see with a STRIDE study. So this is coming up near the end of my presentation, and I sort of summarized this data by reflecting on my own practice, both as a physician, scientist, and as a clinician, and concluded the burden of increasing diversity in clinical trial participation really falls on us, on people like me. And, you know, Ken, one of the things I love about working with you is you always hold my feet to the fire, and you're always very interested in scientific rigor and evidence. And as we were preparing these slides, Ken said every single slide, every single study you presented has a drawback, has a limitation. And that's really true. Perhaps the studies aren't representative. You can always find problems. But the way that I view these studies is that, yes, they all have problems, but overall they're telling, to me, a consistent picture, and they raise important considerations and point in useful directions. And mainly what I take from this is that there are reservoirs of altruism and the ability to build authentic and trusting relationships among minority patients and health professionals. And these two facets of the communities of color offer really intriguing possibilities for increasing recruitment success. And in addition to that, these possibilities should focus on effective interventions that put the onus back on us, changing how we interact with potential research participants and how the current clinical trial system, if you will, is structured. And so this brings me to the end of the presentation, and sort of foreshadowing a little bit of what Ken is going to do at the end, is that our goal in this project is to collaboratively with those who decide to sign on with us, develop innovative strategies that will increase diversity in clinical trials and help meet overall recruitment strategies without generating undue burden on the system. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I guess I will stop now, and there should be time for questions. Is that right, Ken?
Thank you very much, Jerome. I think we do have time for a question or two. As for those who are just joining us, we have 3 presentations. So I want to make sure we have time to get through all of them and also leave some time at the end for discussion and feedback on our STRIDE study. But if there are some burning questions for Jerome, be delighted to take those now. And I think for those who haven't had the pleasure to know and work with Jerome, you can now understand why we miss him so much, not being in person at UAB. That was really a terrific review. So any questions? Any comments? All right. Well, why don't we, we'll have time for discussion. I think we're going to move on to the second presentation, and it is a tremendous pleasure to welcome Mona Fuad, who is also a co-investigator on this study. I don't think Mona needs much, if any, introduction. She is the Division Director of Preventive Medicine, the Director of the Minority Health Center, and also Senior Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. So, Mona, we look forward to hearing about what you and your group have been doing in this area for many, many years. So thank you for being part of this.
I need this, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Oops. It's good?
That's good.
Okay. So I'm just
You
gonna, I can lay it here, okay. And Ken, thank you for introduction. And Jerome, thank you so much for this presentation. I think I couldn't agree more of your results of your work and what you presented. I could spend another hour to show you other data to validate what you have presented and how the minorities are willing to participate if we have the right approach. And there are many publications to show that, and barriers are different, and all of us have our own barriers. It's just how we can be more tailored to address those. So I'm going to take it from here, and I think Jerome had a slide that has this same information but different format. About that, we can see here that minorities account for less than 10% of patients enrolled in clinical trials, and he showed with some data that recruitment is a challenge, but retention is greater challenge. And the reason I put retention here, that I think investigators, physicians shy from reaching out to minorities to enroll them because they are concerned that they may not be a compliant participants. So they don't want to lose that participant. So they say, oh, this has a lots of comorbidities and barriers, may not be a good participant, so they are ineligible and mark ineligible, which are actually they're not ineligible. But this is the assumption. So, and also Jerome mentioned that the same way I also categorize the barriers related to the community and the participants that live in these communities. I put like barriers related to healthcare providers in general, not just investigators, and to our study design. So I'm not going to get into that, so I can have more time to talk about how we address that. The barriers that probably Jerome did not mention is compliance, and that's really, really important because we have the assumptions, or it is true that we worry about retention as we recruit our participants, because if your participants drop out, you don't have power, you lost everything, because once a participant enrolls, you can't replace. And the literature show that they start losing interest in the study. They're not assigned to the group that they wanted to. I remember we had with the Women's Health Initiative, women that were assigned to drug versus placebo, and some women really, it was like hormone replacement. They took the pill and they powdered it and went to the pharmacist to see if this is a real powder or something in it. So people are really obsessed about that. Older people also tend not to comply. Low education level, unemployment, because every day they have something different in their life, and the studies are not a priority. And Jerome mentioned transportation, childcare. So here at UAB, and I'm going to come into solutions, I'm not going to talk about the barriers and all that. I'm going to say about 15 years ago, we here at UAB looked at our Division Preventive Medicine, the Cancer Center, and UAB in general, and we found that everybody's interested in minority participation. And in preventive medicine, we started doing this work because we had several grants since Al Oberman and others to do minority focus grants, and people started calling us and say, how are you getting your minorities? So we thought about if we can establish a core facility to help investigators to recruit for studies, we can have more a central unit to just focus on minorities retention and recruitment, and this would help investigators to reach their goal. So we came up with this recruitment and retention shared facility. First, it was funded as one of the HSF patient-oriented grants, and then the Cancer Center was interested to put it as part of their core grant that is still get funded through our Comprehensive Cancer Center, but also we leverage the funds from the Minority Health and Health Disparity Research Center. So what is that core facility? It is like a shared resource here at UAB that provides experienced staff that can enroll participants. We started as a pilot in 1997, and then in 2000 we applied for the core grant. As of now, we enrolled over 30,000 participants in more than 90 studies. We have project planners, we have coordinators, we have telephone interviewers, we have community outreach personnel, and we have patient navigators. We developed experience in population-based studies, therapeutic trials, behavioral, every kind of investigation, and we focused on African Americans and women. So it is a one-stop shop for recruitment. We work with investigators to identify potential participants, and we develop culturally relevant messages based on the study and what you're looking for. We also help in consenting, enrolling, scheduling the participants in your study. And then what's very important is we have a huge database and data system that generate reports for monitoring, which I'll show you. It's very important. So we can monitor and see what's working, what's not, where we are with our goals, and help the investigators to know what they need to do best. And as I mentioned, we have also a database, like it's like a customized system that you can customize your inclusion criteria survey. So we can all buy like a CATI system. We can talk to people, assess their eligibility, and enroll them. So we have also data analysts that we do focus groups, and we do informant interviews, we do qualitative analysis, we link with our biostatisticians to do other things, and then we provide in a case management approach retention services. These are just example. We've done, as I mentioned, 90 studies, but I can show you studies that had large number of African Americans that we were able to enroll in these studies, like the Women's Health Initiative, PLCO, which actually, Jerome, we enrolled 40 people in one day at Tuskegee. We got them consented. You know, we used to go out and do orientation sessions and listen to questions, answer the questions of the participants to enroll participants. So you're right, once you have information informed, and they can make an informed decision. And so these are some of the studies that we have done, the large NIH studies. Now, we have a process once we meet with an investigator that is even developing their proposal, or they have their proposal. We try to answer these questions. Who's your target populations? Are they older people? Are they younger? Are they African Americans in rural areas, or you want them to be close to here? What geographical location? What is the best mode of contact for these people? Are they health system based? So we have to be in the health system, or you want to do mailing, or you want to send out outreach people. So we decide based on the populations what is the best mode of contact for them. And then we select the strategies, as I mentioned before, like if either media, mass mailing, community outreach, social media. One of the things that we have a database that is actually representative of the Alabama, about 90% representative has 4 million names. Every name has an ID number, and that's the thing about recruitment. To know your yield, we know now our denominator, because we know how many people we reach and how many people responded, and then we know how many people we enrolled. So that database is really a great resource. And then we create the materials, and then we track and monitor. These are some of the reports we do, and you can see we track daily, weekly, and monthly. So we make sure that we are on target. If we want to change our our method or strategy, we can do that before it's too late. We also, in addition to that 4 million, I took some slides out because of time. We also have a health profile database that has about 25,000 names. And these are people that they gave us permission to contact them. And they complete a one-page questionnaire about major health conditions and other behavioral habits that we collect at Kirkland outpatient clinics and in the community. So we can contact people based on their condition. So in summary, for this facility, we help develop recruitment and retention plans. We identify potential participants, and we conduct community outreach. We do phone surveys, focus groups, and in-person interviews. Now, so some of these strategies that we do also, we apply for grants, or we test our methods to know what is the best methods to use strategy to recruit and retain participants. And I'm just going to present to you two studies that we did that helped us to find some strategies for clinical trials. The first one is an NCI-funded study called Community Intervention Retention Study, and the second one is Enhancing Minority Participation in Clinical Trial, both funded by NIH. So both of these studies are focused or based on a model which some of you use called Community Health Advisors model, these are individuals who are trusted and respected in the community. They're natural helpers, and they want to improve the health of their community. And just in this model, that because they can reach hard-to-reach population, they can spread education messages, they help people to access health services. What we did is we trained them to be more of a research partners than just a community health advisors. So for that first study, the objective of it is to evaluate the effectiveness of the CHOS to increase compliance and adherence in a randomized clinical trial funded by NCI to manage abnormal pap smear called the OZ trial. And this, we trained the CHOS, which they were volunteers at that time, as I mentioned, as research partners. This study, the OZ trial, the parent study, the PI of it was Dr. Ed Partridge. And I remember I walked to him and I said, I want to write this R1. Can I use your study? And he was thrilled because at that time, he was going to recruit young, low-income women that was concerned that they're going to come to one visit and then they disappear. So the OZ trial enrolled almost 1,500 young women. 63% of them were African Americans, and they had a high relative risk of HPV positive. And this trial really changed the national guidelines for management of women with ASCUS LCIL cytology. And they had 82% follow-up rate. So what we did, we randomized the trials to two matched communities. Some of the participants in the ALT trials received the CHA support, and the others received both of them received the standard care, which the reminder calls, money for transportation, incentives in the clinics. So the control and the intervention received both things, but the intervention, in addition, had a community health advisor support. So what we trained the community health advisors on is about clinical trials. So we train them in 4Ms to market promoting the opportunity of excellent medical care being in a trial, to teach women about research and health issues, to motivate them by sending them cards and making sure that they still connected. And also as research partners, we taught them to document what they're doing. They got training, and after the training, they had graduation. This is very, very important because these women, this is the first time they ever graduate. So they wanted a ceremony to graduate. They invite their friends, they invite their families, and they become community health advisors, research partners. So for results, like of our sub-trial or sub-study with the Oz trial, we reached adherence rate for women coming to their clinic visits in the intervention group of 80% versus the control 65%. And this was statistically significant. But I think what was even more important that they not only showed up at their visit, the compliance rate was higher because like they had to come back for 4 visits. So 4 out of 4, 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4, the intervention group made more, complied with more visits than the control. And we published this in the Journal of Cancer. Then we moved on to upgrade this community health advisor model to patient navigators, clinical trial that we can really place those patient navigators in the clinics to enhance minority participation in cancer therapeutic trials. So we wrote this grant that Dr. Selwyn Vickers is the lead PI. I'm a multiple PI to NIMHD to enhance minority participation in clinical trials. And the reason for this application was when we were renewing our core grant for the Comprehensive Cancer Center, NCI said, your African-American patients who expected to have cancer in your catchment area are 23%, and you only have 11% participants in clinical trials. So you have to do something. So we piloted the patient navigation as support for African-American patients in our clinics. So what we did when we had the study is that, and Jerome, like you may like that, like we didn't want to assess barriers for the participants. We said, many people have done that. For 15 years, we've been publishing this information, but we need to assess barriers in our system and our investigators. So we conducted interviews actually in 5 cancer centers, in the Anderson, UC Davis, Hopkins, Minnesota, and UAB, to see what are the barriers. Interviewed the director of the cancer centers, investigators, and administrators. And we came up with, based on these barriers, were 3 solutions that investigators never been trained to recruit for minorities. Physicians need support, and we need some monitoring system. So I'm going to talk about the patient navigators. And the reason for the patient navigators, as you can see here, is to link between the patient, the investigators, and the community. How it's implemented, they meet African-American patients receiving care at our clinics. They educate them about clinical trials. They work with the research nurse to explain the studies. They do an assessment to see what barriers they have that they can't come for these visits and address these barriers. So they do counseling, they review the trial, they do the calendar with them to see how many visits they're gonna come. They see what things they need to support from the community, gas cards, meal vouchers, lodging for coming to radiation therapy, referral to services, and counseling the patients, and they become proactive to bring them back. So the bridging communication gap, as Jerome said, that some physicians don't talk much to African-American patients. They orient them about the resources. They do problem solving and refer to services. They serve as an advocate for the patient. They give social support, and they visit them even and they got admitted to the hospital. These are some data about the kind of services they do and the number of services they provide to the patients. We can see here at the beginning, physicians were very reluctant and the nurses to refer the patients to the physicians, but it increased over time. You can see here that about 72% of patients referred to the Navigators get enrolled in the trial. We increased our enrollment from the 11% to 22%, which we were very pleased to do that. You can say that patient referral, by the physicians adopted this model. First, they really didn't even want to meet them. So we had increased referral. We had decrease in decline in clinical trials. We had increase in accepting clinical trials, and we had increase in enrolled in clinical trials. Retention rate increased. The patients, the African-American patients supported by patient navigation were compliant 74% versus the one that didn't 37%. This was also statistically significant. And these are the results. These are Navigators that they hear, and now actually they're helping with the Alabama Genomic Initiative. They already, in less than 3 months, recruited over 700 patients to this initiative. And they're going to be helping us, and then we publish this in the Journal of Oncology Practice. Thank you. Sorry that I had to run through this.
So I think what we're going to do, I want to try to finish on time here. I appreciate everybody being here, and we are particularly eager to get your feedback. So I'm going to, if it's okay with you, Mona, save the questions on your part, because I think it really integrates very tightly into the new study. This is the work in progress part that we wanted to get your feedback on and hopefully get some of you interested in being investigators. And this is what we call STRIDE. It's always tough coming up with a clever acronym, even harder to come up with a good logo. I wish I could take some credit for this. I think the team did a very admirable job. So the goal of STRIDE is to improve racial and ethnic minority recruitment in clinical trials by creating culturally relevant tools and interventions. Here are the 3 aims, and I'm going to spend time on the first aim and just explain the different components of the intervention, so I won't read that now. And then we're going to, after we develop the intervention, we're going to do a test of this intervention in 6 trials, 2 at each of the 3 collaborating sites, and then the final step would be to disseminate the product, assuming that we're successful. So the intervention is really building on some of the things we've already been talking about, the idea of community engagement, partnering with people in the community, using that as a way to do some training with research assistants, developing e-consent platforms that are culturally sensitive, and then using the idea of storytelling. So a multimodal approach that aims to bring these technologies and techniques to the research teams of these actual clinical trials. These are the 3 participating sites. You can see the different responsibilities. Won't belabor this, but just to point out again that we've divided the work across the 3 CTSA partners. Now, it's a great pleasure to really point out the importance of community-based participatory research. Mona has just done a terrific job of highlighting the long history at UAB of using community health workers. We're very pleased that Clarice Davis is here with us today as our community investigator at UAB. Clarice, raise your hand. And we have, I don't know if Jackie or Fred are on with us, Jackie at Vanderbilt and Fred at UMass. And we've been using work that the Vanderbilt team has been doing, a type of focus group approach called Community Engagement Studios, to solicit input from people in minority communities for developing parts of this intervention already. So 3 steps: develop, evaluate, disseminate. The e-consent is the first component of the intervention. Now, we're particularly privileged to be working with Vanderbilt because, as I think many of you know, Paul Harris at Vanderbilt is the developer of the REDCap platform that I suspect many of you have used in your clinical research. And so the e-consent platform actually will be, in this essence, a module within the REDCap platform. And it'll have all of the traditional elements of informed consent plus some additional functionality that I'll illustrate. And it's also going to be CFR Part 11 compliance, so that there won't be issues around the data confidentiality concern. How many have used e-consent in clinical trials? Has anyone had experience with this? So we've done it, but it doesn't look like anybody has. It's actually been reviewed by the UAB-IRB and preliminarily found to be acceptable. And we've actually used this not only to get the consent, you can then print the consent, or you can email the consent with a secure interface. So this is what the e-consent looks like in terms of the signing. You can type in your name, you can use your stylus, your finger, or personalized ID, and then again, that can either be printed or delivered electronically. There's date stamps that allow it to be assured that the investigator and the patient are signing in the appropriate sequence. Now, another component that the Vanderbilt team has been helping us develop is incorporating videos. And the videos take two forms. One will be storytelling that I'll discuss in just a minute. The other is a collection of snippets that deal with medical procedures. You can see an example of one here around a lumbar puncture, but there's a whole library of these that have been collected and are being modified and incorporated into the consent as appropriate, depending, of course, on the particular study. There's also avatars, which are sex and race ethnicity specific to the population being targeted and approached. They can be given a voiceover. You can point to the avatar and get additional information. Here was an avatar from a e-consent that we developed with a private sector entity on a study in osteoporosis. They say this looks like someone here in the room, but I don't really think so. But you can see how they might interact with you. There's hover over features, and here's one example of that from one of our research collaborators who's a bit into running. You will come into the lab annually on National Running Day, and then you can hyperlink that and get a little definition of what is National Running Day, since she's an ultra marathoner. So do patients like it? Are they willing to use e-consent? This is a little pilot study we did, a small sample size to be sure, but just to give you a sense, in our osteoporosis pragmatic clinical trial where people were randomized either to get a paper consent or an electronic consent on an iPad, that in terms of satisfaction with it, it looked pretty similar. If anything, it looked like the e-consent may have been even a little bit better in terms of satisfaction. But again, wide confidence bands given the small sample size. So the other two pieces are research assistant training. This is really built on a lot of what we're doing with our medical students and other professional students around simulation-based training. It's based on previously established core competencies. There'll be a 2-day intensive training held at the UMass Medical School, working on establishing rapport, understanding, responding to emotion, all culturally tailored, and standardized checklists with core competencies, minimal pass scores, opportunities to retrain with some pre-work, and then the on-site experience, debriefing, practice at home, and an opportunity at home to do some in situ validation of this approach. And then the last piece is storytelling. What is storytelling? Well, this is the idea of homophily. People relate to things that that have some similarities to them, either the characters and the stories are similar to them, the stories are similar. We have real participants from clinical trials describing their personal experiences. And again, this is an adjunct to the consent. So this doesn't take the place of anything you would routinely do in the consent process. And it's been said that the power of narratives to change belief has never been doubted and has always been feared. So brainwashing, if you will, but hopefully for a beneficial purpose. And this, again, just illustrates the sort of theoretical construct of this homophily and hopefully a change in attitudes and behaviors that might accompany this. Here's an example, actually, not around informed consent, but of an actual intervention aimed at improving quality of care that our colleague Jerome Allison did a few years ago over at the Cooper Greene County Hospital. They developed a very grainy home movie style DVD, sat mostly older African American men down in the waiting room and talked to them on this DVD about the complications of hypertension And it had a very profound effect, better than you would see in many pharmaceutical trials in reducing blood pressure, even greater among those that had worse blood pressure. So this has been demonstrated in this paper in Annals of Internal Medicine to be effective in this setting. So here's what the study looks like. This is how STRIDE will operate. It's a quasi-experimental design. There's an intervention and a comparison group, but there's also a before and after. It uses an interrupted time series design. So hypothetically, this is the pre-intervention phase in the intervention group. The intervention rolls out and ramps up over time, and then there's an increase in the slope in the rate of minority recruitment in the clinical trial compared with the comparator group, and also a change temporally over time in this time series approach. So what does it take to collaborate with us in STRIDE? If your study is assigned to the intervention arm, the team will collaborate with you to integrate e-consent, if you so choose, with ancillary components into an ongoing clinical trial. Research assistants will have an opportunity to participate in a training session at UMass with travel expenses covered and honoraria provided. And for both arms of the study, investigators will provide the STRIDE team with aggregated data. We need to know the rates of recruitment at the various stages of the study. What kinds of studies are we looking for? We're looking for adults, chronic conditions. We're looking for ones that have more than minimal risk. So we're thinking drugs or therapeutics. And the study optimally, because it's powered when you do a time series based on the number of points that you have over time, we need to have about 30 individuals who are consented. That doesn't mean necessarily randomized, but 30 people that are consented, optimally half of them prior to the intervention being inserted into the study, and then about half afterwards over about a 30-week period. So that's our goal, and you can see the timeline which we're entering now. We're looking for studies now. We want to have these studies that are recruiting into the early part of 2018. These are the things that the team can do to support potential participation in this. We have data management tools that we'll provide, including iPads. We'll cover the simulation-based training expenses, collaborate with the trial team to facilitate anything that needs to happen with the IRB, help in tailoring the e-consent platform, and also collaborate in, I have the trial team actually participate in scientific reports that come out of this investigation. So this is where we are right now, and now I want to really get your input, because this is what we wanted to do in part with this session. We want to identify studies, but we want to hear from you about what your impressions are as you've heard this today and how this has been rolled out. So I have truncated this a little bit in an effort to leave time for questions. I think before opening the floor up to questions, let me see first whether Jerome, Stephanie, or the Vanderbilt team has anything additional that they want to add to this overview of STRIDE. Stephanie, Jerome, any comments?
Ken, I think you did a great job. I don't have anything to add right now. This is Stephanie.
Yeah, Jerome's here. I think it was a great job, Ken. I don't have anything else to add at this point either.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes, and if there's questions for Mona, for Jerome, what's your impression of this study? Do people have trials? We passed around some handouts that allow you to reach out to us. And David, how about you? Are there studies that you're doing that might fit this?
Well, we're always doing a lot of studies. So some of the things we're doing that are really looking for diversity and minority participation are really more in the biomarker realm than they are in the actual intervention realm. And so, you know, this reflects some of what goes on in neurodegenerative disease. We're not necessarily always there. So we've seen several trials come through recently, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, other areas, really pushing the biomarker aspects. Now, they involve things like radioactivity and PET scans and lumbar punctures, and whether that makes it to where you want to be here with the e-consent is the emphasis, I guess. I'm not sure.
So I guess one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about was the type of study. And we were concerned that we might not see necessarily recruitment variability we might see less recruitment variability in studies that had lower risk. And so we're particularly interested in trying to overcome barriers around risk. And studies that involve interventions, I guess the studies you're mentioning do have some risk, don't they, with radiation?
There's some.
And other
It's
things.
not an intervention. So I guess the other side of that, though, is if I think about the really interventional trials that we're doing, things like antibody infusion and maybe stem cell transplantation into the brain, these are not going to be local UAB trials. So am I going to convince the pharmaceutical sponsor to engage and convert the consent to an e-consent? I'm not so sure I'd get any traction on that. I don't know what your thoughts
we're
are
aware
on
of that. I think
so.
that may be a non-starter for studies that we're not the central site for.
But if it's really intervention and we have to be the central site, that does narrow it a lot.
Yep. Jeff, you have thoughts? You do a lot of clinical trials.
Sure. So, I mean, the two studies that come to mind, so we have a large pragmatic vaccine trial that, of course, a lot of this nice work was preparatory to, where we are using an e-consent. I mean, you're giving a live virus vaccine to people on biologics, which is sort of a no-no, which is why it needs an IND, and there's a data safety monitoring board, and there's a lot of oversight by the agency and by NIH, et cetera. So yeah, the safety concerns are not inconsequential. We're trying to use sort of population screening using I2B2 and research match and more outside the box approaches. I guess the other thing that's relevant that we're actually already doing with Vanderbilt that needs to be reinvigorated is to recruit to some PCORNet studies. And although technically that is minimal risk research, the thing that actually makes people uncomfortable is the disclosure of PII and PHI, and we have about a 90% failure rate in that for every 100 people that come to the website that to learn about this registry or the study inside the registry, 90 look at it and say, nah, I'm not doing that. So although you've said the studies are, that there needs to be more than minimal risk, I guess disclosing who you are and what you have is perhaps still in that vein, even though it may be more an observational study design. So I guess that's where the risk part is, giving up who you are and that information and consenting to link to, the Vanderbilt CDRN data.
So if we were able to relax that criteria, that could potentially allow the VERB study to be part of it. Are there other things that you see as barriers to your study being considered in terms of what we
No, I mean,
laid out?
I think both those studies, both the vaccine pragmatic trial and then this other study that we're already doing with Vanderbilt, that we already have some good pilot data that what we're doing so far hasn't worked very well. But it's being done at Vandy with us as kind of the coordinating center. So, I mean, that might be exceedingly opportune. And the consent is already digital, but it's not fancy, and it's certainly not, culturally tailored. And people are afraid of, disclosing who they are and what they have because of privacy concerns. And so I guess I feel like that's not traditional concern about the risk of research. And yet when 90% of people say, nah, I'm not doing that, and yet they qualify, I think they're voting with their feet, and that's where something like this may have a real benefit.
Come back and maybe make the same point. A big study where a big study where we'd love to have, and we really need to have minority participation is the Alzheimer's Center. So this is, neuropsychology, diagnosing people with potential future risk of Alzheimer's. So there's a lot of personal risk and suspicion and concern. And there are radioactive materials involved. And so there are risks, but it's not a drug or a therapeutic. So, relaxing that would be another, and that's a place where it is a UAB study and could enter this if that was part of the criteria.
Yeah, I think there was a question back there. Mona, I want to let you go again, but somebody else who.
I'm just going to say.
I'm speaking about Alzheimer's there.
So Eric Roberson from the Alzheimer's Center. Just to echo what Dave was saying earlier, the within our memory disorder space, most of our interventional trials are multi-site trials, and the ones that we're doing locally here are more biomarker. But I think we probably have a bigger hurdle to get people to enter a trial like that has an LP than a therapeutic trial that has an antibody infusion. People are more worried about getting an LP than they are about having an infusion of an antibody. And I think the e-consent seems like a really attractive idea. This ability to like embed these instructional videos that might, be able to kind of explain some of these procedures, whether it's an LP or a PET scan. Because really the key for us in recruiting for these studies is it's not always getting people in the door, but it's getting them to consent to each and every piece of to doing all of those procedures, which is really what we get evaluated on.
So what I've heard from pretty much all of you is the qualification criteria for the studies looks like the big barrier to participation. I haven't heard any other comments about any of the things we're asking your team to do, or collecting the data, knowing rates of recruitment, or any of those things potentially barriers to being part of this, because we're still a little bit formative. We're getting pretty darn close to launching this thing. We want to make sure we get it right and that we can answer the question in the way that we've designed it.
So I'm just going to add one thing, and then I'm sorry I have to go for another meeting. But what we can do also, we have several ongoing studies, and we have also some studies coming under the RSF. There are a lot. We can go and see the list and see if any of them could qualify for what you want to do. I think the e-consent would be a great thing to test. So we can do that too.
Yeah.
So we can,
well, this is,
look and see.
This is
Dr.
Yeah.
Open Stroke Center.
Thank you.
So I just would like to emphasize that most of our studies are going to be multi-center. So that if we can overcome that barrier, we have plenty of therapeutic, trials. One that we're starting, it's going to look at apixaban and aspirin for embolic stroke with unknown source. Would probably be a very good trial, but it's a multi-center trial. The other thing is, is this a day 9 to 5 kind of study, or is it available at 2 in the morning on Sunday morning?
Well, I think once it's set up, so the training of your coordinators it's essentially a one-shot deal. The storytelling is built into the platform. And so once the platform is built and you've got the iPad, it's whenever you want to use it.
Okay.
Jeff?
Although we've talked some or even around, the single center, multi-center, how much do you think that this platform could support a multi-center study, or at least pieces of it? So, if we're coordinating it and you have 20 or 30 sites, at least some of this, particularly on the recruitment side, essentially, could we help other sites recruit? They're going to have to do the study visits locally, but if you have a way or a mechanism to go reach out to people and find them, you could do most of the important pieces to find and kind of pre-screen people and get them engaged. How feasible is that for multi-sites that are outside of Alabama?
I'm going to see if anybody...
So this is Jerome. Ken, could I jump in for a second? And
I was about to call on you.
Really...
And then I think we're going to need a break after this point, because I did promise we'd end on time, and we're a couple minutes over already. Yes, Jerome, go ahead.
Maybe I could ask Colleen to make a... Yes, and maybe I could ask Colleen would be the most appropriate person to respond. But Jeff, that's an intriguing possibility. And from conversations we've had with Paul Harris, that the approach of e-consent is really amenable to a central IRB and a central consent form approach, whereas that consent can be done in hubs and all the documentation and support be gathered up centrally. So I think that what you're saying would really be possible. So Colleen, are you still on the line, and could you comment on that as a possibility?
Yeah, Jaron, I'm here. So the platform in REDCap is scalable and shareable across multiple sites. I mean, there would be some logistical issues to address, obviously making sure that the central IRB reviewed would have to deal with if there were site-specific or state-specific language that would need to be put into some consent documents versus others, but it's doable.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody. I really realize it's late in the evening, although Mona had another meeting. I hope many of the rest of you do not. But thank you all very much for your feedback, and we look forward to interacting with you. If you want to send me an email or Liz an email, and you're potentially even remotely interested in having a study be part of this, we'd be just absolutely delighted to have that discussion. So thanks again for being here.
Ken, thank you very much.
Thank you.